Hope you had a great Labor Day weekend and ready to go into a great week, great fall, and enjoy the high holidays that are coming up soon. It's been a busy weekend. I'm sorry a little bit late this afternoon, but I promised you I would start again on Tuesday, so here we are. We started a little bit talking about the divine origin of the Torah, which is the 8th of the 13 principles of faith. This is a heavy one because, as we know, this is really the source of a lot of the disagreement of the different denominations within Judaism. Is the Torah divine? Is it man-made? Is it written by individuals? Is it written by 5 different authors? And so forth and so on. And of course, as traditional Jews, we believe that the Torah was written by God, given by God, dictated really, in fact, as far as the written 5 books of Moses, letter by letter, note by note, from God to Moses while he was on Mount Sinai and during the 40 years that he was in the desert. And there are many other explanations that we can give to point out why we believe this divine origin. And one, as I mentioned last week, that let's look at it this way. Let's say you're God, and you want to give this Torah, and you want it to be known that it's divine. So maybe you would think, you know what, I shouldn't give it to just one person, even if it's one person on a mountain, even if it's a great leader and a person of great esteem, but I'm going to give it to 3 million people publicly. And the main parts of it I'm going to inscribe in stone. Now remember, there are no computers then, there are no photographs, there are no cameras, no way of really verifying something for the ages, except the fact that the power of the experience that they had on Mount Sinai was the one to last for thousands and thousands of years, as it has in fact. And going into it a little bit deeper, the Arizal, one of the famous mystics of Safed in the 1500s, explained that each of the 600,000 letters of the Torah, each one of them has 600,000 levels of understanding. That the oral tradition and the written tradition together make up really one essential Torah. And what is that Torah? That Torah is really the wisdom of God. That's all it is. Not all it is, but that's basically what it is. What do we mean by the wisdom of God? So the Alter Rebbe explains in the Tanya, in the very beginning, that God, as God was creating the world, God, so to say, consolidated or compacted his infinite energy, step by step, light to vessel, contracting it until it came down into a physical world. And the Alter Rebbe explains, in a certain way, God's infinite wisdom was contracted also, to the point where it came down step by step, till it came into what we call the 5 books of Moses, the writings, the prophets, the oral tradition. Now, all of those, believe it or not, at least most of them, can be read by a 5-year-old. For sure, the written Torah was written so even a 5-year-old could understand it. Person can ask, well, what kind of spiritual doctrine and great teaching and high lofty values can any document that can be read by a 5-year-old contain? However, the fact is that only God, an infinite God, could come down so far to give it to even a 5-year-old to understand. And that as we go deeper and deeper into it, we begin to understand its great depth. It says even the Vilna Gaon in the 1700s, that after years and years of study and becoming one of the greatest Talmud masters of his generation, spent the last 5 years of his life reviewing over the 5 books of Moses, book by book, year by year. And he saw it differently, of course, than the way he saw it when he was a young boy of 5 years old, reading it and first learning what it meant, because then he was putting into it all the hundreds, if not thousands of levels of understanding that he had in the Torah as a result of all those years of knowledge and learning. So similarly, as we learn the Torah, we are really learning something that on the very surface appears perhaps to be simple, but has great infinite depth. And I use that word infinite very carefully. But the more a person studies and understands how intricate, how intertwined, how multi-leveled, how complex the study of the Torah can be, and how connected different parts of the Torah are to each other that seem on the surface to be totally unrelated, but really are coming to teach on each other's truths in a way that we'll be able to understand the fullness and the wholeness of the Torah, it takes on a very different dimension. There's a very famous Kabbalist who said that some people think that the Torah, the way it is is written in the physical and hints to the spiritual. He said that really, in fact, the Torah, the way it's written, is written in the spiritual and hints to the physical. That in fact, the Torah itself is a book of great spiritual wealth and wisdom that only an infinite God could have put together in the format that he had. In fact, for those of you who might remember the Bible codes, if you ever studied them, it's really quite fascinating. Not necessarily the predictions, so to say, that are made as a result of them, but learning the Torah as just one of the ways of learning the Torah. In terms of these Bible codes, it really brings out how the Torah is only a code. It's written as a very basic type of communication, but there are so many ways of understanding it. And I believe that in the Bible codes itself, they talk there in the book about how other books perhaps have been compared in terms of the various levels and means and techniques that study can take place. But no other book, no other classic could take up the amount of teachings that the Torah does. They studied Moby Dick, they studied other classics from Shakespeare, and the Torah itself, 87% of the letters had a multi-leveled understanding of what is going on in the context that it's in. While in most other books, it was in the 30s as far as understanding any depth that might be there, whether intended or not intended by their author. So what does that mean? What does it teach us as far as the divine origin of the Torah? Well, I can't sit here, and prove to you beyond the shadow of a doubt that the Torah has divine origin. I can tell you that if you study, if you spend time, if you look into it, if you begin to appreciate the many, many levels of understanding of the Torah, you will begin to see that there's so much more there than literally any regular book could possibly contain. There are many other teachings that we can talk about. Perhaps we'll continue a little bit next week, But the fact is that Torah has survived and flourished for over 3,300 years. For 3,300 years, we have looked at it as being not only, of course, the source of wisdom, but also a source of knowledge of our family. As I believe I mentioned once in one of the first classes that we held, if your next door neighbor would come to you and say that they have a book 3,300 years outlining their personal family history, you would say, this is incredible. This belongs in the National Archives and the Smithsonian Institute. There's never been such a thing before. But when we have our Torah and our Bible and our 5 books of Moses in our house, that really is a direct relating from our ancestors of their experience at Mount Sinai, what they learned, how it affected them, how they followed through, what values they took from it, and the things that they decided but that God decided would be transmitted from generation to generation. So much so that the values in the Torah, look in the portion, let's say, in Kedoshim, or many other special mitzvahs, where the mitzvahs outlined there are morals and values of which for us today in our quote-unquote advanced society are difficult and hard to keep, are challenging for us to be able to maintain. God, though, had an eternal value, an eternal moral set for mankind, set for all of humans. And as a result, that was outlined in the Torah as a basic premise upon which we will be able to grow as a human beings, and to be able to contribute to this world and be able to make the world a better place and fulfill our purpose in life, which is really the outline of the Torah is there in order to help us to accomplish that. For those, just in conclusion, for those who think somehow, though, that the Torah is antiquated, and that it's talking about these desert people, and it's talking about splitting of the Red Sea, which some claim, even in Judaism, never happened, or some claim that it's impossible that certain miracles should have happened. Well, we all have choices, of course, whether we can believe our ancestors or we can't believe them. But for those who might believe that somehow many of the things in the Torah contradict science or contradict facts, it's not the case. There is no factual, scientific, empirical law which the Torah contradicts. There might be theories, many theories, which have not been 100% proven, that the Torah perhaps disagrees with, undermines, or contradicts directly. But there is no empirical scientific statement that you could find anywhere in science that the Torah itself will contradict and disagree with. So the creation of the world, the nature of humankind, the nature of our biological, physical, chemical, physiological makeup, the nature of the planets, of astronomy, of all of the universe, and what we see today empirically are totally in sync with what the Torah says. So, as the great sages say, go and learn, study, drink from the water of the Torah. Most people think the Torah is very basic and they really don't give it the credit that it deserves. And it doesn't require a tremendous amount of time and effort to be able to start to appreciate what the Torah is. Set up a class, do some reading, go to Chabad.org and read articles about the Torah and about the origins of the Torah, about the meaning of the Torah. Set up even a learning partner for a half hour a week. You can go to jnet.org/li and set up for a chavrusa, as we call them, a person who will learn with you directly and tell them, I want to learn what is this Torah about, what are its origins, how do I know it's true, how do I know it comes from God? And I can't do that in 10 minutes, but you can do it by putting some time and effort into it. And if in fact it is from God, as millions and millions and millions of Jews have claimed throughout the centuries and have died for the fact that they believe that is from God, if in fact that is true, it deserves your time and effort to do a little bit of research and find out and learn more and see if in fact it's something that has what it takes to be able to go from fantasy to reality as far as believing that this is really the word of God. Have a great day, and I hope you take up the challenge. Ooh.